Hello everyone, it's Jenna and today I'm presenting my final project titled In Good Hands. This presentation explores two of the world's most sophisticated puppet traditions, Japanese Bunraku and Indonesian Wayang Kulit. We will walk through what these forms are, who performs them, how they work, and why they matter. But above all else, this presentation is about the puppeteers themselves, the humans whose training, worldview, and artistic decisions bring these objects to life. So I do want to begin with a deceptively simple question. What makes a puppet appear alive? So is it the object themselves, the craftsmanship, the materials, the engineering, or the puppeteer, their technique, timing, voice, movement? Is it the cultural context, the stories audiences recognize, or the ritual meaning attached to the performance? This question becomes incredibly rich when we look at puppetry across cultures because different societies attribute life to puppets in very different ways. My central argument is that puppetry is fundamentally an art of agency, agency being action, intervention. It's the creative, interpretive, and cultural labor of the puppeteer themselves. So we often admire the puppet object, but in performance traditions, the true artistry is in the human body, with decades of training, cultural knowledge, and interpretive decisions, as we'll come to see. By comparing Bunraku and Wayang Kulit, we can see how puppeteers shape cultural meaning, as these two traditions both share very long histories and are very technically sophisticated. They still differ drastically in their aesthetics. To guide us through this argument, we'll start with what puppetry is fundamentally and in general. Then we'll learn about Bunraku from Japan and then Wayang Kulit from Indonesia. We'll do a more comparative deep dive with aesthetics and apprenticeships, and then how we can apply this to continuity, change, in the future within puppetry, arts, and the world. These two traditions are among the most globally recognized puppet theaters. Both have been preserved for hundreds of years, but they embody completely different ideas of what a puppeteer should be, or what a puppeteer is. This contrast helps us understand how cultures shape artistic meaning. So I would argue that puppets, being objects, do not have an inherent meaning. Of course, a different conversation would be the craftsmanship and even ritual practices and meaning that go into creating that crafted object, but the object themselves gets their meaning through how they're used and interpreted. So apprenticeships are therefore not just skill training, but it passes down cultural values. Bunraku is Japan's classic puppet theater. It developed in Osaka during the 17th century, a period when merchant culture flourished and theater became a major urban art form. What makes Bunraku distinct is that it is not just puppetry, but a total theatrical system. A Bunraku performance combines three elements simultaneously. We have the puppets manipulated in full view, a taiyu or chanter who performs all the dialogue and narration, and then a shamisen player who provides musical structure and emotional pacing. Unlike other types of puppets, such as marionettes, Bunraku puppets are manipulated directly by human hands, so this physical proximity allows for an extraordinary level of nuance, but it also demands absolute precision, so the audience is able to experience somewhat of a psychological illusion with this realism through very controlled movements. A Bunraku puppet is roughly half the size of a human body, carved from wood and assembled in sections. One of the most important features is that the head is detachable, so different heads represent different genders, ages, and emotional types, allowing the same body to play multiple roles. The heads themselves are mechanical systems. Some include moving eyes, rotating eyeballs, lifting eyebrows, or articulating mouths. These mechanisms allow puppeteers to suggest interior emotional states such as sadness, hesitation, resolve without exaggerated motion. So in a way, Bunraku puppets are not designed for speed or spectacle. They're designed for stillness because their weight, proportions, and articulation support extremely small movements that read as emotionally meaningful when executed correctly. And there's not as exaggerated of movements as we've seen in different puppetry traditions. Each Bunraku puppet is animated by 3 puppeteers, each responsible for a different part of the body. We have the Omazukai, or main puppeteer, controlling the head, torso, and right arm. This performer leads the movements and is typically the most senior. The Hirazukai controls the left arm, often mirroring or counterbalancing the right. And then the Ashizukai controls the legs and feet, kneeling on the floor behind the puppet. So what's really remarkable is that none of these performers can act independently. A gesture only reads as alive if all 3 bodies move as one. This means that emotional expression in Bunraku is not individual, but instead it's collective. The puppet's interior life is created through coordination rather than personal expression. This scene from The Love Suicides at Sonozaki, written by Chikamatsu Monzaemon, is frequently cited because it demonstrates how Bunraku produces emotional meaning without dialogue. So Ahatsu's decision to die with her lover is communicated through a nearly imperceptible gesture, a slightly lowering of the head, a controlled shift of weight, and a pause. There is no sudden movement, no dramatic flourish. What makes this moment powerful is that the audience reads it as an interior thought. This illusion depends entirely on the puppeteer's ability to execute microgestures in perfect unison. A millisecond of mistiming breaks that effect. This is why Bunraku training emphasizes discipline and restraint. Emotional realism is not expressed, but instead it is constructed. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of Bunraku for audiences unfamiliar with it is that stillness is not necessarily a lack of action, but instead it's one of the most demanding expressive techniques within the form. So in Western acting traditions, emotional intensity is often communicated through visible physical action such as facial expression and extravagant movements or vocal emphasis, but Bunraku operates on the exact opposite principle, where emotional depth is created through micro gestures, which are movements so small they verge on not even being seen or perceived by the audience. So if we go back to this scene with Atsuku from The Love Suicides at Sonozaki, at the moment she resolves to die, the puppet does not dramatically collapse or gesture outwards, but her decision is communicated through a slight lowering of the head, a controlled pause, and a redistribution of weight in the torso. The fingers may tighten almost invisibly. So what makes this moment powerful is not what happens, but what does not happen. The audience reads hesitation, resolve, and internal conflict precisely because the movement is restrained. So the effect depends on the three puppeteers maintaining perfect synchronization. If one puppeteer anticipates the movement too early or lags even slightly, the illusion of interior life collapses. Stillness then becomes an active collective labor. It requires extraordinary muscle control, breath coordination, and shared timing. And this is why Bunraku training emphasizes restraint over expressiveness, where emotional meaning is produced through not through display but through disciplined containment. Roland Barthes' observation is central to understanding Bunraku's aesthetic logic and its cultural implications. When Barthes writes that emotional clarity emerges because the human disappears behind the gesture, he is not suggesting that the puppeteer is unimportant. Quite the opposite, he is arguing that Bunraku requires extreme human discipline to produce the illusion of autonomy in the puppet. In Bunraku, the puppeteers are visible on stage, yet their individual identities are systematically minimized. They wear black robes, their faces may be hooded. More importantly, their personal expressive impulses are subordinated to codified movement and collective timing. This aesthetic directly supports my thesis that puppetry is an art of agency, not objects. The puppet appears emotionally clear not because it moves freely, but because human agency has been carefully restrained, shaped, and redirected. Barthes' insight also helps us understand Bunraku as a reflection of broader Japanese cultural values, particularly those emphasizing harmony and self-effacement and collective responsibility. Emotional power emerges not from individual expression, but instead from the disciplined coordination of multiple bodies working toward a shared aesthetic goal. Bunraku apprenticeship is one of the longest and most hierarchical training systems in the performance arts. Apprentices often begin in their early teens. They start as an Achizukai, controlling only the puppet's legs, often for 10 years or more. This phase teaches balance, weight, and stillness. Only later are apprentices allowed to move to the arms and eventually, after decades, to the head. The system is not simply about technical mastery, it teaches cultural values, being patience, respect for hierarchy, and the suppression of ego. Apprentices learn to see themselves as part of a lineage rather than as an individual artist. The use of kata, or codified movement patterns, ensures that gestures developed generations ago remain legible today. In this way, Bunraku apprenticeships transmit cultural memory through the body. Bunraku's aesthetic of invisibility operates on several levels: visual, physical, and cultural. Visually, the puppeteers are present on stage, yet dressed in black and positioned to draw minimal attention. This is not an attempt to deceive the audience. The audience knows the puppeteers are there. It's an aesthetic agreement instead. The audience consents to focus on the puppet rather than the human labor animating it. Physically, invisibility is reinforced through technique. Movements are stripped of unnecessary flourish. Puppeteers learn to suppress personal habits and stylistic signatures so that the puppet's motion appears unified rather than fragmented. Culturally, this aesthetic reflects long-standing Japanese values rooted in Confucian and Buddhist thought, particularly the prioritization of harmony, humility, and social order. In Bunroku, artistic success is measured by how seamlessly one merges into the collective rather than individual recognition. This aesthetic does not merely reflect society, it actively reproduces it. Apprentices are trained to internalize hierarchy, patience, and self-effacement in performance. These values are enacted repeatedly, reinforcing the idea that meaning and beauty emerge from disciplined cooperation rather than personal display. Bunroku is inseparable from the cultural values embedded in its training and performance practices. First, discipline and patience. Apprentices often spend a decade manipulating only the puppet's legs. This extended delay before advancement instills humility and reinforces the idea that mastery is earned through endurance rather than talent alone. Second, hierarchy and lineage. Progression in Bunroku is not flexible or self-directed. It follows a strict order, reinforcing respect for elders and masters. Knowledge is transmitted vertically through teacher to student, preserving historical continuity. Third, collective harmony. The three-person manipulation system makes it impossible for a single puppeteer to dominate the performance. Emotional expression becomes and belongs to the group, not the individual. Tamao Yoshida, designated a living national treasure, exemplifies these values. His career was defined by extraordinary restraint and precision. His recognition by the state underscores how Bunroku is viewed more than just mere entertainment, it's cultural heritage, a living embodiment of Japanese social ideals. Through training and performance, Bunroku does mirror Japanese society and actively trains bodies and minds to perpetuate its values. Wayang Kulit is a classic Indonesian shadow theater tradition with roots over 1,000 years old. It is most commonly associated with Java or Bali, where it continues to play a central role in religious and community life. The term wayang refers to shadow or imagination, where kulit means leather. The puppets are carved from buffalo hide and manipulated behind a white screen, creating striking silhouettes when lit from behind. Unlike Bunroku, Wayang Kulit is deeply tied to ritual. Performances often accompany weddings, temple festivals, or community ceremonies and can last all night. Wayang Kulit puppets differ radically from Bunroku puppets in both form and function. Rather than striving for realism, Wayang Kulit puppets are intentionally stylized. They have elongated arms, exaggerated noses, and angular profiles, which signal moral and social qualities rather than physiological realism. Because these puppets are viewed primarily as shadows, their design prioritizes silhouette clarity. The carved patterns allow light to pass through, producing intricate textures on the screen. Meaning emerges through contrast, outline, and movement, and much less on surface detail. This abstraction reflects a different cultural relationship to representation. Wayang Kulit does not aim to simulate human interiority. Instead, it presents archetypes and moral forces shaped and interpreted by the dalong in performance. The central figure in Wayang Kulit is the dalang. Unlike Banruku, where agency is distributed among many performers, here it is concentrated in a single individual. The dalang manipulates every puppet, voices every character, cues the gamelan orchestra, and controls the pacing of the performance. Beyond technical skill, the dalang is also understood as a ritual mediator, a figure capable of guiding the audience between the everyday world and the mythical or spiritual realm. Importantly, dalangs are expected to improvise. They adapt dialogue, pacing, and humor based on the audience, the occasion, and contemporary social conditions. This flexibility is a defining cultural value. The opening sequence of a traditional Wayang Kulit performance functions less like exposition and more like ritual initiation. During this section, the dalang moves slowly, often holding a puppet almost motionless, while chanting or modulating the voice. Musical cues from the gamelan are carefully timed. This slowness is deliberate. It signals to the audience that they are leaving ordinary time and entering a sacred narrative space. Unlike Banruku's stillness, which suggests interior psychology, Wayang Kulit's stillness establishes cosmological order. The dalang is not disappearing here, he is asserting authority. Through voice, pacing, and positioning, the dalang frames the performance as a communal and spiritual event. This moment demonstrates how Wayang Kulit foregrounds the human performer as mediator between myth and audience. Ki Manteb Sudarsono is one of the most influential dalangs of the modern era. Born into a family of puppeteers, he began performing professionally at a very young age. He became famous for his incredibly fast and precise sabian or puppet movement, particularly in battle scenes. His performances pushed the physical limits of Wayang Kulit, including a legendary 24-hour performance. But Manteb was also known for his willingness to incorporate contemporary political commentary into traditional narratives. During periods of political unrest, he uses clown servant characters to voice criticism indirectly, allowing audiences to process social tension through allegory. The Gara Gara scene represents one of the most culturally significant moments in Wayang Kulit. Midway through the epic narrative, clown servant characters such as Simar or Petruk interrupt the story. These characters speak in contemporary language, reference cultural events, and often mock political authority. Crucially, this satire is improvised. The dalang adjusts content based on the audience, location, and political climate. During periods of repression, Gara Gara becomes a safe space for coded criticism. Here, the puppet functions as a social shield. The Dalong can articulate communal anxieties indirectly, preserving harmony while still allowing critique. This reflection is very accurate to Japanese cultural values of indirect speech and social balance, unlike Bunraku, which preserves meaning through repetition, while Kulit preserves relevance through adaptation. Waiankulet apprenticeship differs fundamentally from Bunruku. Training is often informal and immersive, taking place within families or communities. Apprentices learn by watching, assisting, and gradually performing. Rather than mastering fixed movement patterns, they internalize narrative structures and learn how to respond creatively to live situations. Here, authority is not earned through invisibility, but through presence. A skilled Dalong is one who can read the room spiritually, socially, and emotionally. These two traditions offer fundamentally different answers to the question, where does meaning come from? In Bunruku, meaning emerges from restraint. The suppression of individual presence allows the puppet to appear autonomous. Emotional realism is achieved through disciplined repetition and precision. In Waiankulet, meaning emerges from presence. The Dalang's voice, humor, and responsiveness shape interpretation. Authority lies in adaptability rather than control. Neither approach is more authentic. Each reflects cultural priorities. Bunruku emphasizes continuity and harmony, while Kula emphasizes community engagement and responsiveness. Apprenticeship systems, of course, train performers, but even more so, they produce cultural subjects. In Bunruku, hierarchy teaches obedience and patience and respect for tradition. Authority comes from lineage and mastery of form. In Waiankulet, authority comes from responsiveness. Apprentices learn by watching, assisting, and eventually improvising. A successful Dalong is not the one who follows rules most strictly, but the one who best serves the community. These systems do not merely reflect culture, they perpetuate it. Through repeated training and performance, they shape how performers understand power, expression, and responsibility. Earlier in this presentation, I introduced a more general and broad version of this question with what makes a puppet come alive. But diving deeper, how does the visibility of the puppeteer affect interpretation and thus the believability of the puppet? I want to complicate this question a little further. In Bunruku, visibility exists through prominence. The puppeteer's body is present yet visually neutralized. The audience is encouraged to forget the human, not through deception, but through aesthetic discipline. Emotional investment is directed toward the puppet's stillness, rhythm, and restraint. Waiankulet operates differently. The Dalong's visibility through voice, timing, and improvisation is central to meaning. The audience does not suspend awareness of the puppeteer, but they engage with it. Emotional resonance comes not from illusion, but from relationship. This raises an important interpretive question. Is emotional depth dependent on believing in the puppet as an independent being, or can it arise through acknowledged mediation? Rather than framing these approaches as oppositional, this comparison suggests that aliveness may be culturally constructed. What feels emotionally real depends on what a society values: discipline or responsiveness, restraint or charisma, continuity or immediacy. When discussing tradition, it is tempting to imagine continuity as resistance to change. Both Bunruku and Waiankulet challenge that assumption, though they do so in different ways. In Bunruku, continuity is maintained through codified movement and lineage. Plays are repeated across generations, not because innovation is forbidden, but because meaning is believed to accumulate through repetition. Each performance becomes part of a long historical conversation. On the other hand, Waiankulet maintains continuity through flexibility. Stories remain recognizable, yet the manner of telling evolves constantly. Contemporary references, political commentary, audience-specific humor ensure relevance. Here, tradition survives not by freezing form, but by remaining porous. What unites these approaches is the understanding that tradition is not a static object. It is an active negotiation between past and present. Change, in this sense, is not a threat. It is the condition that allows continuity to exist at all. This directly reinforces the thesis that puppeteers' agency is the mechanism through which tradition persists. So preservation is often discussed as a technical problem, how to keep an art form from disappearing. In puppetry, however, preservation raises deeper questions about what exactly is being preserved. In Bunraku, preservation has taken institutional form. Government designation, repertory theaters, and formal training systems protect technique and lineage. These structures ensure consistency, yet they also risk limiting experimentation. Wayang relies more heavily on community-based preservation. Performances are at ceremonies, festivals, and local events sustain the form's social function. Documentation through recordings and archives support transmission but cannot replace live, responsive performance. Both traditions increasingly engage digital tools, global touring, and interdisciplinary collaboration. These strategies expand audiences while also transforming context. This raises a critical question on is preservation about maintaining form, maintaining function, or maintaining meaning? The answer differs depending on how agency is distributed between performer, institution, and community. Modern adaptations reveal how these traditions respond to contemporary pressures without abandoning their core principles. Bunraku has entered new contexts through collaboration with operas, experimental theater, and international festivals. These projects often preserve technique while altering narrative framing. The question becomes not whether Bunraku can change, but how much contextual shift it can absorb while maintaining aesthetic integrity. Wayang has long incorporated contemporary politics, but modern dialogues increasingly address global issues, media culture, and social change. Younger performers integrate lighting technology, digital sound, and shortened performance formats. These adaptations provoke essential questions on if adaptation strengthens a tradition or if it dilutes it. Who has the authority to innovate, and is authenticity defined by fidelity to form or fidelity to function? Once again, the answer returns to agency. The future of these traditions depends not on preserving objects or scripts, but on sustaining knowledgeable, culturally embedded performers capable of interpretation. In conclusion, this project has argued that puppetry is not so much an art of objects, but an art of agency, or even more so, an art of the people. In both Bunraku and Wayang Kulit, the puppet serves as a site where cultural values are negotiated, embodied, transmitted. Meaning does not reside in the material form alone. It emerges through trained bodies, disciplined repetition, interpretive choice, and so on. The puppeteer operates as a mediator between past and present, myth and community, restraint and expression. Through apprenticeship and performance, cultural values are not merely represented, but instead, they are actively rehearsed and reinforced. By examining these traditions side by side, we can see how different societies answer the same fundamental question: how should meaning move through time? The answer in both cases lies in the hands of the puppeteer. I want to close by returning to the opening question of this presentation: what makes a puppet feel alive? For some viewers, Bunraku's restraint may produce a powerful sense of interior life. The puppet's apparent autonomy, achieved through disciplined invisibility, can feel deeply human. For others, Wayang Kulit, immediacy, its humor, improvisation, direct engagement, all creates vitality through relationship rather than illusion. Neither response is more correct, and each reflects different cultural assumptions about where life meaning and emotional truth resides. This final question is not meant to produce consensus. Instead, it invites reflection on how our own expectations shape interpretation and how puppetry reveals those expectations back to us. I did want to end this presentation by briefly addressing the research process behind this project. Scholarship on Bunraku is relatively well documented, particularly in performance studies and Japanese theater history. In contrast, academic grading on Wayang Kulit, especially contemporary practice, is more dispersed, often appearing in ethnographic studies, interviews, or regional publications. Most of this research required cross-referencing performance footage, practitioner commentary, and secondary analysis. This fragmentation reflects the varied nature of Wayang Kulit as a living adaptive form. The difficulty of finding unified sources reinforces one of this project's central arguments on puppetry knowledge often residing in practice rather than text. Documentation can support transmission, but it cannot replace embodied expertise. In that sense, the research process itself mirrors the subject matter, knowledge preserved through interpretation, and not so much so static record.